I've never known what to make about Skyward Sword. It was always the one game that I never really knew what to say about it. Usually I'd end up saying that it's good, since I did enjoy it quite a bit, even more so than Wind Waker, but there was always this underlying feeling that permeated throughout the whole game that made me unsure of what exactly to say about it. That feeling was frustration. I was frustrated that the game treated me like I was an infant and had the attention span of a goldfish. Frustrated at some of the stupid things it forced you to do with the controller. But the biggest thing that frustrated me was the repetition of constantly revisiting old areas and the general forced backtracking that felt like it was just trying to replicate the feeling of going back to an old area in the other Zeldas whilst completely missing the mark. I would think about playing it again, but then these three things would come flooding back into my mind, resulting in a game that I haven't played a single other time since 2017. I even replayed Zelda 2 and Phantom Hourglass multiple times, as opposed to the singular playthrough I did of this game, and if that doesn't prove just how polarizing it is to me, then I don't know what will. During this retrospective journey throughout the 3D Zeldas, Skyward Sword was the one game that I was simultaneously the most intrigued to play, yet also the most dreaded entry I would have to play. So, how does the game hold up for me 4 years after my last playthrough? Before we get into that, I have a confession to make. I did not play the original release like I had for the previous videos. I instead played the HD remaster for the Nintendo Switch. The main reason that I initially went for this particular version was literally just that FI was toned down significantly. The only thing that I thought could reasonably make a playthrough more bearable. However, pretty much every other change improved the experience in some way, so before diving into the video proper, I would like to talk about these changes since they did affect what I had to say about the game. Obviously, one of my favorite aspects of the game is that Vi is no longer an annoyance. Whenever she does pop out, it's never for some arbitrary, stupid reason, and there are even points when she comes out to spell out information that would have been hard to deliver to the player otherwise, like how you won't sing in certain spots of the quicksand in the Lunaro Desert. Compare that to the Wii version where she harasses you every 5 minutes. Every time the sword would glow, I would pat myself on the back for not playing the Wii version, which would have been a section where she could have needlessly spoken to you, and I became even more grateful as the game goes on. What the frick was that sentence? I actually really like the character Fi, following up the companion with the most character. Why not have the next one have no character? I actually grew to like her this time around, so when she effectively dies at the end of the game, spoiler alert for a 10-year-old Wii game I guess, the emotional beat actually lands. Toning down Fi and the over-tutorialization wasn't the only thing that improved the pacing of the game, however, as the frame rate is now double what the original was on Wii, which results in everything feeling much smoother and overall better. However, one thing I didn't expect to change the experience so much was the camera control. I remembered all the areas in the game essentially feeling like giant hallways, especially with Farron Woods and Elden Volcano, which are both built with these walls constantly surrounding you. However, with free control of the camera, now I was shocked to find that these areas weren't actually hallway-like in design, but were a lot more open. However, I'll get to that a bit later in the video. Another change was to the controls, more specifically the addition of button controls. I didn't really like the button controls all that much at first, however I did find myself using them for the second phase of the Girahim fights because of a certain problem I had with the motion controls, but I'll talk about those in the presentation section of the video. The main reason I didn't use them was because camera controls could only be accessed by holding down the L button, which I didn't want to do the whole time. Not only that, but I would just think about how to move the stick to attack enemies, which, as I'll get into a bit later, is the worst way to enjoy and play Skyward Sword. For some reason, I did adapt quickly when using them on the second Girahim fight, which is kind of odd, and I can safely say that they work really well. Honestly, for any future playthrough, I might just stick to primary button controls, assuming that I can switch my mind over to using them. That's pretty much every change that affected my enjoyment of the game. On to the next section. One thing that I've never really mentioned in the previous retrospectives is the story of the games. Whilst I do enjoy the story of most Zelda games, it's never really something that I think is really that necessary for a good Zelda game or something that deserves to be critiqued in the same way that the gameplay is. However, there are two exceptions to this, Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, which we'll get to next time. Skyward Sword is heavily reliant on its story, to the point where some of the gameplay suffers just to appease it. So if the story sucks, then the game will also kinda suck. Luckily, I think that for the most part it does work, but not due to the actual story. It's pretty standard as far as all the stories go, but I did not do it well enough to justify the 40-hour runtime. However, one thing that it does remarkably well is the characters. Obviously, Groose is amazing, and I feel like part of the reason is just because at first you think he's just going to be this game's Mido, a generic bully character that you chat with like twice throughout the game. But then you get this magical cutscene. It's beautiful, but then he goes from being a generic bully to a close friend of Link's, and it's really fun to watch happen. I will say that I prefer Line but preferred to Hourglass though. It's a lot more fun than Groose, but yeah, that's just me. One thing that surprised me the most with this game is that the romantic stuff isn't cringy, which is really nice to see. It's not exactly subtle. I mean, there's literally a track in the game called Romance, but the connection that Link and Zelda have is good enough to have the whole plot surrounding it, so I can excuse a lot of the poor pacing issues that result from the story. There are even smaller supporting characters that are really fun to interact with, like Gorko, he's amazing. I also really like Girahim. Since he's pretty upfront about being a servant to the main villain, he gets to shine a bit more than Zant ever did. They managed to strike a perfect balance between threatening and this. There's not much to say about the story otherwise. It's pretty standard Zelda stuff that doesn't try to do anything different like Wind Waker or Majora's Mask, but the characters make up for that. Man, this section kinda sucks. Skyward Sword both looks and sounds amazing. The soundtrack is top-notch, and I love how they didn't make any overly grand or epic tracks when introducing the orchestra. The only track that I can think of that even kind of does that is the Staff Roll, and even then, I absolutely love that music, and it is easily the best credits theme of any Zelda game. Possibly even of any Nintendo game. It's the end of the game, and it deserves its grandiosity, but there are also a lot of great tracks like Faron Woods, the Lanayru Sandsea, or Lake Floria. Skyloft has such a comfy vibe to it. The Sky is one of the best overall tracks in the entire series. Honestly, I could just list all of the great tracks here, but I don't want to pad out the video with meaningless stuff, but you get the idea. This game looks so dang gorgeous. The watercolor painting comes across so well here. I love the colors and stuff. I don't really have much to say on the visuals, I just think they look really nice. The enemy designs have seen a massive upgrade from Twilight Princess. The bokoblins here look like actual creatures and not disgusting, hideous monsters. I really like how the Lizalfos look. Moblins are a bit too fat for my liking, but other than that, they don't really mind how they look. What the frick? You also have Demise in his imprisoned form. He looks like an avocado. Look how original the joke I made is. I really like this goofy design though, especially since it contrasts with his human form. He even has flames or hair. 7-year-old me would have squealed with joy seeing that. I also really like how expressive Link is. It's not quite Wind Waker levels, however, for a more serious adventure compared to that game, I think that it's perfect. I mean, just look at these glorious screenshots. He is the perfect incarnation. And that's all I have to say regarding the visuals of the game, but we're not done here yet. As a kid who grew up on the Wii, I obviously am very biased in favor of motion controls. I think that they are pretty decent here. There are a few really stupid uses, like with the Loft Wing. There's no good reason that they couldn't have used the analog stick, especially since they implemented it for button controls in the HD version. I don't want arthritis just because I want to go fast, you sadists. There's also swimming, which is even stranger since you use the analog stick for it when you're not properly swimming, but when you are, you suddenly have to use motion controls. Other than those two instances, I really like how a lot of it was utilized. Being able to throw bombs and standing still is a godsend, and I like being able to roll them since it allows for more versatility and creativity. Controlling the beetle is fine since it feels like these parts were designed to be controlled by the motion controls, but none of those are the major use. That would be the sword play. For the most part, I really liked it. I will say that the Joy-Cons aren't as comfortable to use as the Wii Remote in this regard, but that's a small issue. The reason that so many people have so much trouble with the combat is because they're not playing the game right. And yes, I realize that it makes me sound super pretentious, but I believe that it's true. The game expects you to think about how you're going to move your sword before you swing. You need to be intentional with how you move the controller, which is why some people have issues and others don't. It helps to just think about the direction you need to swing instead of focusing on swinging the controller properly. I know that I'm right because this was the problem I had with the button controls. I would think of how I needed to move the stick instead of thinking about which direction I needed to move. Once you understand the combat, the game becomes a lot more fun. I really like the Girahim and Demise fight since they make effective use of the controls and it really feels like you're in a sword duel. It is a little annoying when you'll swing in an open direction but then the enemy will go to block you there, but other than that it's perfectly fine. I feel like a lot of people complain that the controls don't work, but I don't think that's fair to say because the game is designed around the fact that motion controls aren't 100% reliable. However, with the HD release, there was one issue I constantly ran into from the beginning to the end, and that was with gyro drift. Look at this footage. This is me holding the controller straight. It is really annoying how often it happened, though it is curable with a simple push of a button, but when you're in the middle of a battle, it can be kind of hard to reset it since you could accidentally set the wrong direction to be straight or something. But other than that, it's not something that ruins the game or the controls, and it's something that can't really be fixed due to the nature of the Joy-Cons. It's just something to keep in mind. When it comes to combat outside of talking about the motion controls, as in how the enemies work, I actually really like it. The columns are standard and boring, so we won't talk about them. They're decently fun to fight, but other than that, there's just nothing to talk about. Those alphas will avoid all of your swings, so you need to wait for them to stand still so you can hit them when they aren't blocking. Then you have keys, which are usually grouped in a line, though you don't need to attack them all at once. Individually is fine. In fact, I don't think I ever attacked all of them at once a single time. Then you have moblins, where the most effective strategy I found is to get behind them and slash away. It's especially easy when you're on a narrow platform. You also have Stalfos, who utilize directional swings the best. There's not much to say otherwise. It's the only enemy in the game that actually feels like you're in a sword duel with them. This is all fine and good if you don't take into consideration the shield bash. It is borderline OP, and the timing is so loose that it doesn't really matter if you screw up. I get what they're going for here. If you fail the timing or just hold it out, then the shield will take damage. But since the window is so huge, it takes away a lot of the risk-reward element of it, especially since you can just easily lug around an almost dead shield to repair later on. Shields are expensive, especially upgraded ones, but repairing them is cheap, so if you don't want to lose your epic shield, you can just lug around your nearly destroyed one, which kinda makes the shield taking damage in the first place kind of lame and unnecessary. I do like how before you upgrade the goddess shield to get better durability, that they do have reasons to keep both the wooden and iron shield, so that's kind of cool I guess, but overall I feel like the shields are just a big waste of potential. Overall though, I like the visuals, soundtrack, than the controls for the most part. Now that the superfluous fluff is out of the way, let's take a look at the gameplay. Split up into three main sections: the sky, Skyloft, and the surface, with the surface itself being split up into three sections itself: Barren Woods, Elden Volcano, and Lanayru Desert. Let's start with the sky. It's empty. There's nothing to do. All it does is create space between your destinations. There's a boss fight in the Thunderhead, the Isle of Songs, a bamboo minigame that we'll get into later, and a lumpy pumpkin. There are also a few smaller islands scattered around, but none of it is really noteworthy. On its own, the sky is honestly worse than the Great Ocean. However, the Great Ocean was the only thing that the Wind Waker had to offer in terms of overworld content. Sure, there were islands to find that had more substantial content to offer than the sky, but Skyward Sword has a lot more content to offer everywhere else but the sky. Therefore, Skyward Sword has a point against the Wind Waker. It also annoys me how little use the Loftwing gets. Like, they make it a big point how close Link is to his Loftwing and how special that Loftwing is compared to the average one, and then they do nothing with it. Here's to hoping they get a shot in the Breath of the Wild sequel. Not much else to say, let's talk about the other stuff now. Skyloft is basically this game's version of Clocktown, and I really like it. The main thing that it has are side quests, which I'll talk about a bit later. There's the bazaar, where you can buy equipment, upgrade your stuff, talk to a fortune teller, and store items if your pouch is full. I really like that if you don't buy the stuff, the people get annoyed or aggressive. It's a nice, fun touch. There's not much to do there outside of the opening, outside of side quests. It's very similar to Clocktown in that way too. Now onto the real content. The biggest problem with the Overworld in Skyward Sword is that everything feels like a video game level and not an actual world. Granted, they're really fun video game levels, but they're video game levels regardless. This results in revisits being a little mundane and not as fun as the initial visit. Barren Woods is a pretty solid first area. As a first area, it is relatively easy to navigate and gets you properly accustomed to combat as well as how the next few areas will function. The exploration is very minimal, however there are a few optional goodies that you can collect, though they're pretty easy to spot, meaning that they aren't as fun to find as they were in previous games. There's Lake Floria, which apart from its aesthetics is pretty unremarkable gameplay-wise, really only existing to teach you how to swim. There's a decently fun section on the inside of the tree, I guess. There are these shortcuts that you can unlock that basically eliminate the previous obstacles you've gone through. There's really not that much to talk about when it comes to Barren Woods, honestly, mainly because it's small and everything you do there is really simple. I'm mixed on having the area structured like dungeons. On the one hand, it's pretty interesting and different compared to the other Zelda games, but on the other hand, it takes away from the satisfying exploration that completing dungeons allowed. You even get items in the overworld, ones that you got in dungeons in previous entries. I don't hate this idea completely, but it just makes the overworld feel like mini dungeons, and that in turn makes the whole game feel like one giant dungeon to an extent. If there was more to do in the sky, then it wouldn't have been an issue, but the sky is as empty as it is in real life, so it's unfortunate that major areas don't really feel like proper worlds. Eldin Volcano has a lot more going on than Faron Woods. There's the base of the volcano, which is the most level type area, but I like it since you need to figure out how to get to where you need to go. I like how it makes you think about what you do with bombs and transporting them. Then you have this slide area. It's kind of cool, I guess. I don't know why it sticks out in my mind so much. There's also this section here where you need to run up this slope with a bunch of boulders being rolled down toward you. It's pretty fun. There's also this area which you need special earrings to access so you won't catch on fire, and while it's a lot smaller than the other areas in this section, it's still pretty fun to progress through. This whole location is fun to traverse, and the way that everything connects to each other feels a lot more intentionally designed than either of the other surface areas. However, once again, there's really not that much to talk about in terms of what it has to offer outside of being fun. The Lanayru Desert has a lot going on, and it is by far the best area in the game. There are these caves where you learn about the time shift stones, which are an integral part of the area. I love how they're utilized here. There's so many creative ideas that they come up with. It's a lot bigger than Eldin or Faron, and I think that it's definitely the one section that feels the most like a proper world. Figuring out how to progress here is really satisfying, and there's a lot of individual areas that are each distinct from each other. The open section is mostly about exploration to find certain terminals to access the Lanayru mining facility. Then you have this gorge, which is there so you have to go the long way around to get to the Temple of Time. The section connecting these two can be a little obnoxious since you have to wait for these crab guys to die in order to get from platform to platform. Then you have the proper Lanayru Gorge where you have to keep up with a minecart carrying a time shift stone and activate switches so that you can turn the bones in the main section of the gorge back into an alive dragon. My voice is dying, please forgive. Then you have the Sand Sea, which is an open section that has nothing to do and only really serves to create space between locations, though the visuals are absolutely amazing. Like, it's so visually neat that I can kind of forgive it. There's the robot captain's house, which is super depressing since you learn that his family and crew are all dead, and there's a few notes from his family and crew that are on the wall. Dang, that's sad. There's also the shipyard, which has a fun roller coaster section that's pretty fun. Who wrote this garbage? And a rematch against the third dungeon's boss. Trying to find the invisible ship and attacking it is decently fun, and a good utilization of dowsing, which I will talk about later, go figure. There's also the Pirate Stronghold, a pretty cool mini dungeon where you need to move a time shift stone from the end to the entrance, but there's not that much to really say about it. Compared to previous videos, there's really not much to talk about when it comes to the content of the main areas. That's because of how they're set up. Despite everything I've said so far, it's a lot of fun to go through these areas and to progress through them because, as I mentioned earlier, they're closer to video game levels than an actual world. So in order to really talk about them, we need to take a look at the progression. See, that's a clever little segue. The progression of Skyward Sword is split up into 5 sections: the opening, the first, the second, and third visits, and finally the final showdown. So let's take a look at how it all plays out and what I like about this setup and what I don't, though I'll save the final showdown for when I get to the bosses. The way that the first visit works is that you'll enter the area, get introduced to the main idea of the area, then you'll have to douse to find things and enter the temple. Faron Woods starts with you entering the sealed grounds and then entering the actual woods when you have to find Kikwis. I really like dowsing. It's a nice evolution of the scent trails. Instead of being a waypoint, it just tells you the direction you need to go in and not the specific path that you need to take. This makes it really fun finding things that you need to find. The design of Faron Woods is half open, half level, though I do think that it's a pretty good first area. It's really easy to traverse, and figuring out what to do next is generally pretty non-trivial. The Deep Woods is a fine area, though it doesn't have as much to offer compared to the woods section. The main idea is built around the slingshot and using it to lower these vines, stunning enemies, or harassing the bees. It doesn't do anything interesting with the slingshot, however, because of how short the distance for getting from the Kikwi Elder to the dungeon is. The Elden region goes full-on video game level, and traversing it is really fun. The main idea it explores are bombs. This game differs from most other Zeldas since you can actually roll the bombs and use it for some pretty good sections. You first need to find a way to get to this whole area so you can travel along winding path teaching about how you can use bombs before finally allowing you to get there. Where is there, Josh? Alright, I would like to know. Once you fall down, you are led to a combat section, and completing that allows you to scale the mountain, where you need to avoid these boulders being rolled down these slopes towards you, and it allows for a tiny amount of stamina management that the game so desperately needs. We will get into that later. Hey look, it's the counter again. Next, you need to locate several pieces of the broken key that unlocks the entrance to the dungeon. Locating the broken key is a lot more fun than finding the Kikwi since it involves more than just following a path, essentially. You actually have to look around these areas to find the pieces. Linear Desert, being the most open area in the game, has the best section of your first visit. You start with this short linear section, and you learn about the time shift stones and blowing these statues up to create a path to walk down. After that, you get to the actual desert part. You need to locate a time shift stone in order to upgrade your beetle, allowing it to pick up items. There's this stupid section where you have to wait for the crab snail thing to blow up so you can use its shell to cross over to certain parts. It's really boring waiting for them. I already mentioned that earlier though. Then you'll get to the section housing the Temple of Time, and this is actually a really fun part where you need to activate the correct time shift stones in the correct order to progress to different parts so that you can learn that you actually need to backtrack to a previous area you were just in. Really should have done a rewrite of some of these sections. Then you need to find terminals via dowsing, all of which are these individual room mini dungeon type things that are pretty fun, I guess. After that, you need to lock in the correct order of thingies on the main terminal. The footage hopefully illustrates what I meant. After that, you enter the dungeon. Thus ends the first visit to each area. It is a little disappointing that there weren't more unique areas and they instead have you revisit old areas to access new locations with the same theme. It's not a massive deal breaker though. The second visit also has a flow, which is to learn a new song from the Isle of Songs, go through a previous area to get to a new area, and then complete some challenge and enter the next dungeon. First, you need to activate the Thunderhead, which means that you need to fix a dead robot so you can go down to the surface to get a broken spinning device so that you can move a windmill to face a light tower so you can enter the Thunderhead. Yeah, the pacing is a little obnoxious at times. After that, with the water scale you get from the Silent Realm, which I'll get to in a bit, you swim into the Great Tree and slowly climb up it and learn of the water dragon's whereabouts. Then you scribble something on the gate entrance and enter Lake Floria. You follow the seahorse thing whilst learning about the abilities that you have with the scale and arrive in the lair of the water dragon. You find out that it's been injured in a fight with monsters, so you need to go to Skyview Temple a second time, which is really stupid, and you only go there just to get a bottle of water. After that, you enter the next dungeon. To really shake things up for the second visit, you next go to the Linear Desert and not Elden Volcano. With your newly acquired claw shots, you enter some caves before arriving in the sand area. The biggest problem that I have with the Sand Sea is just how boring everything is. There's really no combat, nothing to collect. It's pretty much if Wind Waker only had story important islands. I already talked about what's located here in the previous section, so there's no need to tread over that old ground. I really like the second visit to Elden Volcano. After being able to go down the fiery path, you find that you need to quench these frog statues' thirst. Eventually, you'll get to one that's really thirsty, so Fi tells you to go back to the water dragon and to take its basin. You take the basin, but because the robot is a dumb, you end up in the entrance, so you need to make your way through the whole thing whilst paying attention to the robot and its condition. It is a shockingly fun escort mission, especially since you need to take the long way around, something I never realized was the thing since I always just took the shortcut. I really like this part, though there's really not much to talk about with it. The third visit's flow is to go through the areas and complete some kind of challenge to learn each of the dragon's part of the Song of the Hero. Barren Woods isn't fun, it's just been flooded, and finding the Tad Toads isn't really that hard, it's just time consuming and annoying. Elden Volcano has a really fun part where you enter during the volcano's eruption, so you end up in Bokoblin Jail, so you need to sneak around and get all of your items back. I guess part of the reason it's so much fun for me is because I kinda like these stealth sections in games. Forbidden Fortress has a lot of waiting around and it sucked, whereas here, there are only a few moments where you need to wait for them to look away so you can sneak around them, and I really like it. Linear Desert has you keeping up with this minecart that's transporting a time shift stone back to the entrance of the gorge. It's pretty fun with you having to take out enemies and get from platform to platform, all making sure you're within the time bubble. I also don't mind having to go all the way to Farron Woods to go back in time to plant a tree to get the fruit in the present day just to take it back to the dragon because it's just a neat idea. There's also the imprisoned fights that I didn't mention, but I'll talk about those when I get to the bosses, so hang on tight till then. The last thing to mention with the progression of the areas are the Silent Realms. They're like better versions of the Tears of Light. The idea is that you get 15 tears so that you can spirit control. What the heck? The idea is that you get 15 tears so that your spirit can grow. Since by this point you should be fairly familiar with the areas, the game expects you to know the most efficient way to get around. I really like these sections. There's so much anxiety whenever your time runs out or when you're spotted by one of these gremlins, since everything goes orange and the instruments clang together as you rush to find another orb. I really like how the second you start it goes into that mode. That way you know what happens if you do happen to run out of time or this trash face spawns you. I actually failed a few times on the Elden one in particular because it's such a big area and they're hidden all over the place. Whenever you do fail, you think of how you can improve your routing so you don't fail again, and when you do succeed, it's such a satisfying moment. I really liked all of them, especially Eldin and Skyloft. They take the core concept of the Tears of Light and turn it into something much more fun and interesting. For once, the items in a 3D Zelda game actually feel useful for the whole game. Despite Zelda being my favorite media franchise of all time, I've never really liked how items never felt like they got as much use as they deserved, at least in the 3D titles. Skyward Sword fixes that and I love it. Every item gets a lot of utility and I found a use for almost everything up until the very end of the game. There are mitts that let you dig, they're pretty cool for finding treasures and rupees, and there's even an upgrade that lets you dig into tunnels. There's the harp, which isn't very good, you just strum it and it doesn't even feel like you're playing a real instrument like with the ocarina. It feels tacked on and every use was pretty forced, especially considering that all the changes between when you play it to open up the Silent Realms or this minigame is the rhythm that you move the controller, or stick, back and forth by. There's the dragon scales that let you swim, the fire shield earrings that protect you from fire, bet you couldn't guess that based off the name. There's the slingshot, which is mostly used for activating switches and stunning enemies, the bow, which is a bow. The beetle is really cool, it allows you to scout the area, activate certain switches, and pick up faraway items like hearts and rupees for you. There's even an upgrade that you get that allows you to pick up bombs and carry them to other places. It's a really cool item, and I'm glad that it gets a lot of use. I love the bomb bag. It allows you to pick up bomb flowers and then put it in your bag, so you no longer need to break a bunch of pots or mow the grass in order to get a refill. It is such a nice feature. There's the gust bellows, which can uncover things and help move platforms, but it's easily the item that sees the least amount of use, though they do get as much mileage out of the item as they can. There's the whip, which can pull high up switches and also pull switches that are behind bars. Basically, it's an upgraded version of the crab look from the Wind Waker, though like the gust bellows, it doesn't really get that much use. Finally, there are the claw shots, which are claw shots, and of course I love them. There's not much to discuss about the items. I'm just really glad that there's a Zelda game that finally makes them feel useful. Before we get into the side quests, I wanted to take a few moments to discuss some of the elements of the game that I couldn't really fit anywhere else in this video, hence the subtitle of the section. First, stamina. It is a huge waste of potential, mainly because of how useless it is. If you want to run down a long section of land, there's always these stamina berries around. If you don't have enough stamina to climb an area, there's always a berry right where you need it. It also runs out so quickly that it makes even getting around quicker feel like something that it doesn't really help out with, if that even makes any sense. Really, the only interesting thing they do with it is this section in Lanayru Desert where you need to manage how much you have to get from platform to platform, but that's honestly stretching the word interesting by quite a bit. One thing that isn't a massive disappointment is upgrading gear. I don't have much to comment about it, though I did want to say that I do really like it. Having a purpose for collecting random bugs and flowers or whatever that's more than just getting rupees is really cool, especially since the upgrades aren't super lame. Things like having longer range and more power for the bow, increased speed and range for the beetle, and more durability for the shields. I really like the upgrade system in this game, despite how little there is to really say about it. I like going out and finding the items to make myself as powerful as possible. There are also a bunch of medals that can help out in some way. The Curse Medal, which makes rupees and treasures appear more frequently, but you can't access your adventure pouch in the process, which is far too annoying for me, so I almost never have it. The Rupee Medal, which makes rupees appear more frequently. The Treasure Medal, which makes treasure appear more frequently. The Life Medal, which gives you an extra heart container. The Heart Medal, which makes hearts more frequently appear, which feels kind of useless considering that the game is generally easy and hearts fall out often enough to make me not want to use it. The Bug Medal, which gives you the bug locations, making it easily the worst one. And finally, the Potion Medal, doubling time, making it the best. What the heck was that freaking sentence? Just use the period, idiot. These medals are all limited by how many slots are open in your adventure pouch, and if I wanted to have more than the potion medal and life medals, then maybe I'd like that, and it would make me think about which medals I would want to take with me, but I don't really care for most of them, so that doesn't happen. I like the idea of the medals, but 5 of the 7 don't really offer that great of a benefit in my opinion. There are also a bunch of mini games, so I figured I should probably talk about them. There's the bamboo cutting minigame where you just go ham with the controller, there's no skill involved. It can be kind of fun, but once you do it a single time, there's no reason to ever do it again. There's a skydiving one, it's pretty fun, not much to say about it, I enjoy doing it. There's the bug catching one, or as I like to call it, what the heck is the video game? Listen, I'm not taking any chances. I'm also not gonna be writing scripts well, apparently. This is like the 3rd time I've had to comment on it, what the frick. And yeah, I could just fix it, but I don't feel like it. I just wanna get the video out, okay? There's the pumpkin pull, where you shoot at pumpkins, because that makes sense. It's your standard shoot at target mini game, and I usually enjoy those, so it gets a pass. There's Rickety Coaster, which is just being in a minecart. It's alright. There's Thrill Digger, which is Minesweeper but worse, not a fan of it. Finally, there's the Boss Rush mode, where you face off against previous bosses. The reward for that one is the best shield in the game, and I'd say that it's worth it, though I'm not really a fan of how late in the game you get it, but whatever. The rewards range from heart pieces to rupees, and most of them are fun, so I say that they're worth doing. Now that padding time is over, let's talk about those side quests. If there's one thing that I failed to mention in previous videos, it was the side quests. I really enjoy them, but I usually only talk about one or two, so this time I'm going to change it by talking about every single quest in the game that nets you gratitude crystals, which give you special rewards if you give them to this demon guy. So let's talk about some of those side quests. You can clean someone's house and get some rupees out of it. Yeah, that's all there is to it. You can repair Fun Island by locating the party wheel and using your dazzling ability. There's this really weird one with the Item Check girl where you flirt with her and then either say yes that you do like her or say no and get gratitude crystals from her father. You can give fellow student Fledge some steroid juice so you can be a real man with real muscles. You can find the fortune teller's missing crystal ball by dowsing. These are really easy, and the most that they ask of the player is to fly around through the sky, which isn't very fun, but they're usually over in a few minutes. There's a terrible fetch quest, just like from the good old days though, don't worry. You talk to this guy who tells you to find his sister, so you fly over to her and she tells you that she needs medicine, so you fly back to her brother so you can get an empty bottle. Then you go to Barren Woods to get some mushrooms. Then you fly back to her and give her the stuff. It's really long and drawn out and the reward isn't really worth it. However, there are a few decent side quests in the game. I really like the Lost Child side quest. After you beat Skyview Temple, somebody will tell you about her missing kid. Doing a bit of sleuthing, you'll end up in Lumpy Pumpkin, where an old man will tell you about monsters in the graveyard at night. Then you'll need to hit the grave closest to the tree and a shed door will open up, revealing the demon. If you get all of the gratitude crystals, similarly to collecting all the golden skulltulas, he will turn into a human, that is human with quotation marks. This is a quest that you can do all at once or on your own time in the background, which makes the annoying flying somewhat bearable. There's just one quest where you can either give a love letter to the person it's actually addressed to, which leads to a lame sequence where the guy who gave the letter becomes a sad, the girl doesn't like him, or the Chad move of giving it to the toilet ghost hand who forever haunts him at night for the rest of his days because it fell in love with him. How wholesome. There's a kind of side quest involving you having to run errands for the owner of the Lumpy Pumpkin after you break his chandelier getting a heart piece. Things like delivering soup and moving pumpkins into a storage shed and playing music on the harp 5 million times because the rhythm is really stupid. There's not a lot to the quests in this game. They're all remarkably simple. However, they make up for that with the amount of character and charm that most of them have. It's kind of similar to Majora's Mask in that regard too. Now on to the meat and potatoes of Skyward Sword, the dungeons. That changed the least with this replay of Skyward Sword was my opinions on the dungeons. They are all fantastic and easily the best in the series. Before we get to that, I wanted to complain about the boss keys real quick. I don't like how you have to fiddle about with them for ages just to line them up and get them in the hole. It isn't fun and it ruins the fun climactic moment of getting to the boss room because you have to spend 5 minutes fiddling with the controls until by some miracle you get it lined up correctly. Anyway, onto the actual dungeons. Skyview Temple is a pretty good first dungeon. Teaching you about how the dungeons from here on out will work, yada yada. If you've seen the previous videos, you should know the drill by now. It's actually a pretty short dungeon, all things considered, and that's something that I can appreciate, since generally the first few dungeons in Zelda games can go on a bit longer than I would like. Yeah, I prefer when things start out a bit shorter and slowly get longer as you progress through the game. It's split into two halves that both don't really have anything in common. Heck, the color palette even changes, though the central puzzle motif does carry on in both halves of the dungeon. The puzzles are really just about exploring the environment, looking for these gemstones you need to hit in order to open up doors or to raise the water level. The beetle also doesn't get that much use due to how small the temple is, which is kind of surprising considering how much use it gets afterwards in the game. One of the big highlights with this dungeon is the music. It is absolutely amazing and is easily the best dungeon track in the game and one of the best in the series. It has both a memorable tune that can sink into the background, but it also really fits with the mood of an ancient abandoned temple with danger lurking just around the corner. It's super foreboding. Also, these spider freaks can go and die in a hole. Even after beating the game, I still have no idea how to beat them when they're just like this. And yeah, I know it's probably just because I'm an idiot, but still. I also don't really like the revisit to the dungeon since it feels redundant and forced. It adds nothing to the experience but to waste your time. It would have been cool if you utilized some of your other dungeon items and had entirely brand new puzzles to solve, but alas, That's not the case, and you only end up wasting time here, as I mentioned previously. The Earth Temple is a solid dungeon, though it is the most forgettable one in the entire game. The main problem is that it's aesthetically very similar with the vastly superior Fire Sanctuary, but we'll talk about that dungeon later. I really like the rolling ball sections. I think they're fun, and especially when you're trying to get over to a certain location on the other side of this bridge, but there's stuff blocking your path. I do wish they used it later in the game, since it could have been a good way of traversing some of the areas of Eldin Volcano, but that's just me. One of them is behind a broken wall, so you have to time a bomb throw to blow it up, but I really like that part. Honestly, that's everything that comes to mind when thinking about the dungeon. It's fun to go through, but looking back, it doesn't really take up that much space in my memory compared to the rest of the dungeons in the game. It's easily the weakest one, but it's not bad, hence the usage of the word weakest. I'm out of breath, please forgive me. Lanero Mining Facility is a pretty neat dungeon. It doesn't use the time shift stones to their fullest potential, however it does use them for some pretty cool parts here and there. How most of the rooms work is that you have to look for a time shift stone, then you need to activate it, which doesn't change the layout of the room, just the context. There are a bunch of these platforms that can move when using the gust bellows on them, and I like how for some of them you need to move them into a certain spot first. There's also the stone and the minecart that you need to keep up with at one point, and I will say that I wish the dungeon felt more like an actual mining facility instead of just another dungeon. I don't think that's too much to ask for, considering that the best dungeon in the game feels like a dungeon retrofitted into something, but we'll get into that in just a bit. I think that this dungeon, while it's pretty fun, doesn't have a lot to talk about. It's got a similar problem to the Earth Temple in that regard. So far, it doesn't really sound like this game has the best dungeons in the series. However, from here on out, they really start to skyrocket in quality and memorability. The Ancient Cistern is absolutely gorgeous. The theming of the dungeon being based around the Japanese short story The Spider's Thread, bet you've never heard that one before, makes the whole thing really stand out. The deep purples of the underworld compared to the bright oranges of paradise do a lot to make it visually stand out, along with a few other touches such as the underworld having a more rugged cave-like design compared to how pristine paradise is. I will say that you don't spend enough time in the underworld portion as I would have liked, but it's honestly a minor bump in the road compared to the rest of the dungeon. Mechanically speaking, it's pretty average. This is technically Skyward Sword's water dungeon, and it doesn't even hold a candle to the water dungeons of the past, not even the Tower of the Gods. There's these doors here that require you to strike them in a certain order, so you need to explore the room in order to find the combination. There are these lily pads you can flip over by either landing on them with enough force or with the whip. These switches you can use the whip to pull, but that's about the only memorable thing you do in terms of individual puzzle solving. There are a few great puzzles here though. For one of them, you need to find an alternate path to the underworld since the statue needs to be up to get the boss key. And no, I'm not going to mention the tablet that spoils the whole puzzle and takes all satisfaction of solving it. Dang it! There's also this one door where the solution to how you strike it is on the statue, so you need to swim and explore. I really like that one. It's fun. The visuals of this dungeon really are on another level, and it's what elevates it beyond its mechanics. It's still fun to go through, but not quite as much as the next two. The Sandship is the best dungeon in the game. Who would have guessed I'd say that? Firstly, I love that instead of having time stones that only affect individual rooms, there's one stone that affects the whole dungeon. This leads to some really cool navigational puzzles, like having to find another way to get to this room since it's blocked off in the past, but the only way to get there is to be in the present. It also feels like a real ship that a dungeon was retrofitted into, much like how Snow Peak Ruins felt like a dungeon retrofitted into a mansion. The individual puzzles here are pretty good too, but they aren't really worth talking about individually. This is easily the dungeon where I was stumped the most in terms of progression, which made figuring everything else that much more satisfying. There's not much else to say other than that. I just think it's a really solid dungeon that stands toe-to-toe with Stone Tower Temple, though I do think that the latter's a lot better in pretty much every way. Not to discredit the Sandship though, this one's amazing. I think that the Fire Sanctuary is a bit underrated when it comes to the discussion of great Skyward Sword dungeons. It honestly had me looking at my map far more often than any other dungeon in the game. I think that the overall progression is just under the difficulty of the Sandship, though it isn't nearly as satisfying to beat as that one. I really like the puzzles involving these blocks of something on the lava, since they involve having to look around the room in order to find out how you can make them move. There's also these frog statue things that you have to figure out how to pour water onto their tongues. There's also these lava hand things that you have to turn solid in order to beat, and these sections where you can burrow under the ground to activate switches and get to other areas. It does have some of that generic Fire Temple visuals at first, but But then you get here and it's more out in the open, which is a nice visual contrast to the fiery stuff. It's really cool. The only real problem is that if you don't have bombs like I did, you have to leave the dungeon and then go all the way through it again just so you can blow up a single wall. That was really stupid. It was the first dungeon in the entire series where I had to leave a dungeon for any reason. There's also this stupid section here where you just have to know to jump into the lava over here because a platform will appear just before you fall into the lava. Sure, this NPC tells you about the whole statue thing, but I don't think that it's exactly clear that you're supposed to jump over to it. I was stuck for a good 30 minutes trying to figure out some way to progress. Other than that, I really like this dungeon. It has some pretty good puzzles and fun progression. Skykeep has such a cool concept, but it unfortunately doesn't live up to its fullest potential, and as the final dungeon in the game, it isn't really that satisfying. First of all, there are only 8 rooms in the whole dungeon, which I felt could have been expanded to about 21 rooms, 8 on the inside that you control, and then 13 on the outside surrounding it that are fixed. This could have led to the player having to think about how they move the rooms in a way that they can access other rooms. That's not to discredit this one, however. I think that the idea is executed well, and it does lead to a couple of good navigational puzzles. It's just that I wish they did more with it. This dungeon is kind of similar to previous games' final dungeon, with each of the rooms being based on a previous dungeon. It doesn't test your skills quite like Hyrule Castle from Twilight Princess, but it doesn't really feel like they're trying to, and the mechanics it does involve are some of the more memorable ideas from earlier in the game, though I do wish that they went further with it, as per usual. That seems to be the theme with this dungeon. That being said, I still greatly enjoy it. I really like how there are 3 rooms, with each one being dedicated to the one piece of the Triforce. There's a bunch of enemies that you have to fight representing the Triforce of Power, this one room that represents the Triforce of Courage for some reason, and one of the best rooms of any dungeon in the entire series representing the Triforce of Wisdom. These rooms are each pretty fun and are the highlight of the entire dungeon for me. The Wisdom room is almost completely empty, which is what makes trying to solve it so much fun. You have to think about where you position the time shift stone and where to position yourself to hit the switches. It is honestly a really fun puzzle to figure out and is one of the best parts of any Zelda dungeon, as I've mentioned already. I really like Skykeep, but I wish that the dungeon utilized its main idea more than it actually did. The majority of bosses in Skyward Sword kind of suck, and they're pretty boring to talk about, so I'll try to get this section done and over with as quickly as possible. Scaldray is really easy. Throw a bomb in, mouth, attack guy, run away, rinse and repeat for several minutes, and success. It's fun in concept, but there's not enough evolution for me to get invested. Who thought that Darwin would have so much to do with the quality of a boss? Moldarok is pathetically easy. You just need to attack whichever claw you feel like until it explodes or whatever, and then you need to stab it in the eye. Sure, you have to dig it up sometimes, and it's decently fun, but that doesn't mean it isn't easy. I don't think that bosses need to be difficult to be good. I'd rather have a fun, easy boss that gets over with too quickly than a hard, frustrating one that long outstays its welcome, though a fun boss being difficult would be a nice bonus. Anyway, Koloktos is kind of overrated. I guess it's kind of fun ripping his arms off and then attacking him with his own body parts, but my main problem with the fight is it's just not very fun. The one thing it has to offer is satisfaction, and that's only good enough for a first playthrough, but that's just my opinion. Tantalus sure is abysmal. See what I did there? The first phase, you just charge up a Skyward Strike and attack the tentacles, and then attack the eye a few times. Then for phase 2, you attack its tentacles that suddenly have mouths for some reason, and they'll try to attack you. The eye is really big, so it's hard to miss, and it takes a while to get to that part where it's more than just his tentacles after you, so overall, the fight is quite boring. Then there's Levias, the Overworld boss. It's actually really fun. Attacking the eyeballs with your Loftwing is the only love that the poor creature gets, the Loftwing that is. And after that, you play some tennis with this blob. I actually really like this version since instead of hitting a button, you need to pay attention to what direction you hit the ball in. It's a pretty solid fight. Now on to the best fights in the game, Girahim and Demise. And at the Imprisoned too, I guess. I forgot to write that in the script, oops. Girahim is an interesting boss. In the first encounter, you have to try to bait his hand so that you can slash it from a different side. The problem is that with some of the control issues I talked about earlier, it can result in Girahim blocking or taking your sword simply because you didn't move the Joy-Con correctly, aka gyro drift. His attacks are generally easy to avoid, though overall it's just a fun sword duel. However, the second encounter is a lot better. Everything is basically the exact same, but it's a lot trickier, and it's just so much fun. I don't know what else to say, it just really feels like you're in an epic sword duel with him. The third fight takes place at the final showdown, but before we get to that, we must first discuss the Imprisoned. Honestly, I actually kinda like the fights. Don't get me wrong, the pacing of the game is really dumb, But that's not really the fight's fault, it's the things surrounding the fight's fault. There's a bit of tension throughout the whole thing with you having to keep up with him and slash at his toes to trip him. There's not a whole lot to talk about the actual fight other than that. I just think that they're fun and exciting moments. However, the pacing could have been a lot better. At the start of your second visit to Farron Woods is when you face him the first time, and there's a lot of stuff that you do in between this encounter and the next one. Primarily, 3 dungeons. Once you power your sword up before you can enter the time gate, you have the second encounter. The third encounter comes after a lengthy cutscene and then a bunch of stupid arbitrary tasks in the sky that all totals about 15 minutes. I really don't get why these 2 fights weren't either a part of the same fight or at least more spread out. The solution is to either combine all 3 phases into one giant fight or to have your second encounter be much earlier than it actually is. Maybe they could have it so that when you leave Elden Volcano to get the water basin, you land right as he awakens again. Anyway, let's talk about the finale now. It begins with the Hyrule Warriors wannabe section where you slaughter hordes of enemies in order to get to Girahim before you can summon Demise back to life or whatever. One thing I like is that if you hit where an enemy is guarding, then they'll be the ones to stumble backwards instead of you, which makes you feel a lot more powerful. There's not much else to say, it's a nice climactic moment right before the final fight. Instead of a sweeping 4-phase battle, it's a one-on-one duel with Girahim first and then Demise. The third encounter with Girahim is the best one. First you need to knock him over the edge so you can perform an ending blow on him. I just realized we're almost at the end of the video, and this is the first time I mentioned that move. It's just as good as it was in Twilight Princess, and moving on. After this, he'll shoot laser beams at you. Like I said with the Levi's fight, I prefer this version of tennis since you need to pay attention to what direction you swing rather than just your timing. After that, you continually attack his sword until it breaks and then attack him and the fight is over. It's not really that challenging, especially with the button controls, but it is a lot of fun, and it's probably my favorite fight of the game. Then you have Demise. His first phase is really easy, just swing left and right a bunch until you land a hit and then you dodge his attack. It isn't very difficult and takes no effort. Phase 2, you charge up your sword and then strike him until he's down and then you perform a final blow. It's not difficult by any stretch of the imagination, but the atmosphere is just so cool. Honestly, it's probably my favorite final fight of any game, aesthetically. It's also pretty fun, and it feels like an epic sword duel with him as well. I honestly do have a lot of fun fighting him, and performing the ending blow on him is arguably more satisfying than in Twilight Princess. The final battle in this game isn't overly long, and every phase is fun. Honestly, I kind of prefer it to Twilight Princess in terms of gameplay, which is the perfect segue to the conclusion. Honestly, I expected this video to be a lot more negative than it ended up being. There were a lot of great aspects that I overlooked with that initial playthrough that I was able to properly enjoy thanks to all of the HD changes. The dungeons are all great, the side quests have personality, I enjoy the combat, the main areas are all really fun and have a variety of things to do, the music and visuals are stellar as per usual. Honestly, this playthrough kind of changed my entire Zelda ranking. I still think that Twilight Princess is the better game because it is pure distilled Zelda. However, this game exceeds it in being fun. There's no better word to describe Skyward Sword than fun, and that's what counts the most in my opinion. Next time, I will be finishing this retrospective journey with Breath of the Wild. Since it's a massive game, then it's only fair to say that the next video will also be massive. Not quite as long as Arlo's or Macroc's, at least I hope not, but it will still be a long one, so here's to hoping I get it out before next year. In the meantime, like and subscribe, you dunce. You made it this far. Okay, thanks for watching, bye.